Well, you are the CEO, the founder, or the general manager of a company. You are operating in multiple sites or have a really big operation. Usually, you get reports on what's going on, understand to solve the challenges. On the other hand, the truths are not really aligned. Basically, some department giving you a number that is not make any sense for the overall picture. It might be the financials, it might be the stock levels, it might be the overall availability of the equipments. When you look at the numbers, you are trying to make sense of, is it really working? What is really happening? You actually have a lot of data, but you don't have a truth at the same time. This is making you paralyzed and driving the business with more instinctually rather than with analysis. So basically, you are struggling to solve a challenge that requires a clear visibility. You need some clarity on understanding where to take action next. The role of the strategic architect or the one who is going to transform the business is making all of the different functions, parts of the business, syncing in such a way where it works seamlessly, have a one objective where you divided all of those into different autonomy level for the departments. It's not about just the performance, but as an orchestration of all of the performance for competitiveness control, where you are aligning everyone for the growth, minimizing costs, having a competitive edge in the market. The balance basically is maximizing the profitability where the initiatives that you should, it could be digital, it could be continuous improvement, it needs to have a business value, a measurable impact for the company. You are basically allocating resources for solving those challenges, and you would like your team or the available systems to be able to take actions autonomously rather than having someone basically solving the challenges for you. Your mission as a strategic architect is turning that fragmented operations into one transparent, accountable enterprise where everything makes sense. For a big, large enterprise, especially when you're operating in multi-site or having a really big operation, getting that picture is not always easy. Basically, you need to be able to get a 10,000 feet view to be able to understand what is happening in the overall concept. Basically, if we distill down the manufacturing process, everything starts with the customer order. Basically, you are producing either a service or parts for some customers. They have different requirements, and you get those demands in bulk or in every day. It doesn't matter. It could be coming from multiple sources. You need to be able to consolidate all of those demand and plan the requirements, resources accordingly. Basically, you will need raw materials, you will need assets to drive that transformation and deliver to the customer. So if you look at the overall view, it starts with demand from the customer. They issue some order as a demand. You plan your enterprise with resources. This is usually done on the ERP level for enterprise resource planning. Then you create a plan for the success. You would like to deliver that plan to shop floor where the value is created through different systems. It could be a manufacturing execution system. It could be more labor intensive, like a shift leader who is trying to optimize that process for you. However, the overall functionality is turning that plan into reality, and you leverage your assets, your PLCs, SCADA systems, different configurations on the control level with the equipment that you have to produce those goods in a sequential order. After all of those are finished, you store those into a warehouse, you ship it to the customer, and at the end of the day, you collect your receivables. This is the overall cycle, and you would like to bring everyone together in that frame where turning those end-to-end connected systems impact for the business outcomes. You need to be aligning both operations, customer demands, systems that you have, your suppliers, your network, your delivery system in a one cohesive organism where you have connected through the life cycle of the production from supplier to the customer. So your basic mission is aligning all of those into a coherent, cohesive fashion. And your responsibilities is you basically would like to align everything in terms of, let's say, performance, the critical KPIs. You don't want to have 10 different OE calculation when you are trying to analyze what are the available capacity or how are we utilizing our equipment. You need to be able to have one single model for all of those. You also need to allocate capital and digital transformation priorities. You need to be able to link the losses of the process where you can save those by either have a physical implementation, it could be a new equipment, it could be optimizing the process parameters. Basically, you need to be able to take some initiatives to solve those challenges. And you need to also give confidence to all of the people, not just your teammates or management, all of the investors board should be also aligned to throughout that process as well. Basically, you need to be able to allocate resources in such a way where everyone is confident that that will return a positive ROI for the initiative. In order to do that, you need to be able to see what is happening in real time, have a predictable operation, one operation where it's not in chaos but it's working in a symphony, like more clarity. You can focus on the EBITDA part. You can have at the end of the day, it needs to be the financials are the outcomes. You bet something that it will improve. At the end of the day, you get the outcome as a result of those initiatives. If you have all of the alternatives, all of the problems available, you can make the optimum decision, you can make optimization. However, in real world, it never happens. You don't have all of the alternatives, nor you don't have all of the the puzzles of the puzzle pieces of the picture as well. You need to be able to increase what you have, trying to maximize the resource utilization as much as possible. Those are actually your leverages in your business. You need to be able to increase the asset utilization. You need to have optimum decision where your payment terms between suppliers and customers are aligned. You need to have minimum stock availability, minimum stock problems, so you don't have to focus on if I need to make additional investment to carry out those stocks as well. On the other hand, you need to also empower the domain experts, since you cannot know all of the problems of the business in real time. The ones that are actually living that problem are the ones responsible for solving those challenges. Your role as a strategic architect is aligning everyone that the prioritized roadmap, the initiatives actually benefit the overall company structure. There might be some opportunities since you have different level of resource availability in terms of teammates as well, also for the budget as well. You need to be able to optimize all of those decisions with the available resources. Can they solve that problem in time? Can we make 20 initiatives this year? Those kind of hard questions need to be linked with the business objectives, where the sustainable profitability is the main objective for any company. You need to be able to allocate those resources in such a way, prioritize items, actually help the company solve the biggest challenges. If the company is losing tens of millions of dollars on wasted energy, you don't have to prioritize upskilling in that regard if that's not the first priority for the company. So prioritizing those needs to be linked with the business objectives, where the resources are not effectively utilized, and having the quick wins, the implementation time, the resource requirement, or the investment requirement should be in parallel with both short term, mid term, as well as long term. You shouldn't just focus on the short term gains. There will be projects where you need to have a long term vision, where you don't have to spend all of your resources for short term quick wins. A typical day, like what does it look like for a strategic architect? Basically, you are trying to understand the company's objectives as a CEO, as a general manager, or maybe you are responsible for digital transformation for the overall company, you are basically trying to align the boardroom requirements, what the company owners or the investors are looking for, maximizing the profitability, reducing the risks, and you are trying to make those decisions with the dashboards that you have or some data that you collected required from different departments consolidated, and you have some kind of analysis available for you. There are two extremes in this axis. Basically, either you are going to extinct with instinct, or you are going to have a paralysis analysis. You don't want to have too much data available where you don't have enough alternative options to select from. But on the other hand, you don't want to have no data at all to instinctively and solving the problems with a gut feeling. To review all of those, basically you need to be able to mediate between operations, finance, investor requirements. It's like a multi-stakeholder management where you are responsible for justifying that investment is actually the most profitable one or the most effective one that could yield results for the next cycle of the company. Why the alignment for this is everybody that is involved in this process should be part of that digital strategy that you are putting through. The digital strategy might be just three sentences where you just summarize why the company is turning data as the primary commodity of the business. You are trying to make sense that everyone should be operating with data, everyone should be solving the problems with data. You don't want them to act with the experience. On the other hand, you need to be able to empower those domain experts to solve those challenges basically from every perspective with the contextualized information. So it requires a balance between connecting all of those systems, making sense of that data, make it available for the stakeholders, and have the optimum decisions by a collective mind of the company. You need to be able to capture the overall company know-how, the knowledge base for the company. Because on one hand, you are trying to install different initiatives, solve those challenges, and it requires a lot of alignment from different parts of the company. There are conflicting KPIs. If you have a supply chain team that is just if their objective is just to optimize the on-time in full delivery, then they are not responsible or do not feel obligated to solve. We should be delivering those with minimum overall labor cost. On the other hand, operations might say, if we are going to have this level of on-time in full delivery, we might need to have overtime. You need to be able to align different conflicting parameters of the system or of the organization in such a way it makes sense for the overall objective of the company. It's not a one-man show, it's a team game, and you need to be able to drive all of those different requirements, different objectives, different sites in such a way you have the harmony through all of those operations in a single source of truth, where the decisions really is not on instinct but with the intelligence that is being created by the system. So the main challenges in here, there are cultural problems, there are system availability, data availability, the data integrity. There are a lot of different challenges in here. But if we are going to distill down into 4 or 5 main points, basically you have no unified real-time visibility across what's happening through the operations. You need to be able to create such a roadmap. The problem is going to be solved by implementing this solution, where it's have a clear ROI, a range between what is going to be short-term benefit, mid-term benefit, and long-term benefit. All of the digital initiatives should be evaluated in such a way where the short term is actually the baseline for the ROI calculation. However, if you are going to calculate, if someone asks a strategic architect, what is the overall ROI for this digital transformation initiative? It's not quantifiable because it's not a project, it's not a one-term thing. You are building on top of what you have already built. So at the end of the day, a long-term ROI for a digital transformation initiative can be inferenced with the value of the stock increase, the profitability increase, but it's not just one initiative. It cannot be distilled down to, okay, we invested in here to monitor operator performance, and this is what we gained. It doesn't work like that. It's a piece of the puzzle, and you are basically changing how the game is played with these digital transformation initiatives. There would be different conflicting parameters like we have discussed between operations, supply chain. Moreover, those are still operations. You don't have an alignment between finance, IT, and operations as well. Operations would like to solve those challenges, but the IT team might say, you don't have access to that data. It happens. Or the finance maybe not giving any budget for solving those challenges, because at the end of the day the value is not realized with either IT, it's actually realized with the operations, because that's where the value is created for the company. The slow reactive decision cycles depending on manual data, the teams are actually, if we have, like an example for this is, you are driving a car and you are trying to make decisions by just looking through the rear view window. You don't look ahead. You don't see what's happening, what is going to happen. You are just trying to solve the problem, what is already happened. And at the end of the day, it's already happened. It's a loss for the company. You might have stocks that go out bad. You might have interest rate that you had to pay for not getting the payment in time. Those are already happened. In order to solve those challenges, you need to take the control of what is happening and able to transition from reactive response to more proactive response, where the data is actually enlightening the way in such a way you make the decisions by what you already know. And digital transformation is going to change in terms of both the definition as well as the initiatives, because what you want is a function of what you know. The more you know about the business, the more unraveled the hidden costs or inefficiencies in the operations, the leadership will be able to allocate more resources to solve more challenges, because they will learn they are wasting so much energy and time for solving the wrong challenges for the business. In order to align all of those, the root causes is actually, you need to be able to understand the root causes. There are 4 or 5 main areas. One of them is the operations or the IT level, where most of the systems are managed in enterprise level, is not actually linked together. They have different truths. They would like to monitor how much we produced, where the data should be coming from the machines actually itself, where you have different results on different systems. That's why most of the digital transformation initiatives for the companies actually start with an MES, manufacturing execution system installation. However, on the bottom of it, it's actually not seeing what's planned versus what's happening. It's basically the architecture that you need. You need to first pave the road in such a way you have a common infrastructure, a common language between all of those systems. Then you can actually implement what's being planned versus what's been executed, and you need to be able to see the drifts in the performance or the planning or the execution, where we can improve the overall company objective by analyzing different data sources in a cohesive way. On the other hand, not all of the systems or the machinery that you have is built for reporting or insights. Some of the systems are legacy systems. You have bought an equipment, a press maybe 30 years ago. It's still operating. It doesn't have any problem. Maintenance loves it. Operations loves it. There's no quality problems, but it's not future-proof for your operations. It doesn't give you the necessary data that you are looking for. In those regards, basically trade-offs happen. How much valuable is the process parameter for those optimization? Basically, if we get a sensor that can measure how many parts have been produced, how many bad parts is being created, is it sufficient? Because you can collect all of those with just simple installation of a few sensors. You need to be able to get what is the ideal solution for this problem, what is the problem that we are trying to solve, and it all needs to be linked with the overall company objective. What is manufacturing, where the value is created, where the losses are emerging. You need to be able to analyze all of those and say, do we have the necessary data, or do we have one truth across different departments? There are hundreds of examples that I have seen throughout my consultancy career. There are multiple revenue numbers in a company. How even that happens? Basically, that's a really big question, because you have one system that is responsible for the invoices, and you have multiple revenue numbers coming from those sources. That's why you need to be able to see, okay, this is how many parts we produce, this is how many parts we sold, this is how many parts, bad parts we have, these are rework parts, these are scrap parts, this is how much energy we consume, these are the people that have worked throughout that production, and these are their labor costs, these are our transportation costs. You need to be able to allocate those in such a way you have a standardized KPI calculation and one shade of truth where everyone can understand, okay, this is what we are working on. Because when you have different systems, when they are not integrated, basically you will have that different results from those systems, because they might be considering something that is accepted in one line of business where the overall objective is not aligned with the company one. For example, let me give you an example. A maintenance system has an asset hierarchy, which parts are included in the asset. On the other hand, your ERP or resource planning system needs to be able to issue purchase order for the related parts for the suppliers to have spare parts in place. If you don't have one single source of truth between the maintenance system and ERP system, you will have a sensor named P1 for the operations, which is maybe codified in maintenance system as a C1, where you are trying to issue a purchase order for the sensor A1. You need to be able to have one common language throughout the organization, and that is where the problem actually arises, because different parts of the business have different voices, like the machinery, like the systems. They have different voices, they have different languages, and you are responsible for creating that clarity, the language of the business, where you need to be able to solve the challenges iteratively rather than reinventing integration or improvement project from scratch every time. First, you need to build the backbone of the business as a data layer, as a foundation layer, so you can build on top of those different applications, solving challenges in a common infrastructure where everyone is aligned from the start, rather than aligning everyone throughout the projects and throughout the road. So, how the data helps basically creating that backbone, solving all of the challenges in a common infrastructure? How does Maestro Hub actually helps all of those challenges and able to help you through the transformation journey? Basically, without replacing existing tools, that since all of those systems might be talking, might not be talking, you might need to be able to invest in certain data acquisition solutions or some API integration requirements from those vendors. But you need to be able to have an open system where every data source in your ecosystem communicates seamlessly, rather than having one vendor like a gorilla in the room making all of the standards for you. You need to be able to share that information across the organization in such a way where you have a real-time operational truth for all of the factories. You need to be able to have a common naming structure where you say, okay, this is what it looks like for our operations. There are certain best practices and really good adoptions in terms of ISA 95 structure, for example, with part 2 naming, like enterprise site area, line, cell level, where you map different data sources into those areas and you create namespaces under each of those to be able to solve the business challenges for the business units. You might have a naming space, you might have a namespace with MES, with ERP, with facility building management system, or maintenance management system, quality management system, edge devices, sensor details, and you can access all of that information by just pointing the data sources that to the common infrastructure that you have. After that point, you need to be able to make sense of that data, basically turn the data into information. This is what IoT platforms, industrial data operations, a specialized part of the IoT makes actually helpful during those transformations. You need to be able to take different parts of the business and turn that information in such a way it's already normalized, correlated, contextualized, because when humans interact with the systems, it's a different thing. And when machines, systems, or other data sources interact with that system, it's a completely different thing. When we look into something that we are already familiar with, maybe the operator might be working for that asset for the last 10 years. When they see the temperature data as 25, they can understand it is Celsius, or they can understand it is the temperature that is measuring the overall environment detail. However, the machines actually do not understand in that detail. If you don't give the metadata the context that is needed, it needs to be able to merge together in such a way the decision making makes sense, shows the overall picture for the executive dashboard, like what is being spent, what is the performance, what is the financial outcome. Those are the parts of the puzzle where it is related to financial parts. However, not everyone is linked with the financial parts. Some of the uh, operating level operators, for example, operating level is not concerned with the finances most of the time. They are concerned with the performance measures that they are allocated. How are they performing? Are they on good terms? Are they overperforming? Are they underperforming? They would like to have a measurable KPI where they can see if they are good or bad. They need that decision in order to solve that challenge, is basically turning that information for the different persona in such a way it can make the best action, best decision in that regard. If the trend is moving to a bad outcome, maybe a spare part might be created during those deviations, the operator should needs to be informed that they need to take an action to adjust the parameters to prevent those from happening. You need to be able to solve that in real time, not just creating a dashboard for the executive or the finance team, or might be looking in at the end of the day a shift evaluation report. You need to be able to solve those challenges in real time, where you have one single source of truth to say, okay, this is scrap, this is rework, this is what is the operator's overall performance, this is what the overall equipment effectiveness. You need to be able to have those common languages and the standardized models or flexible problem solving models in certain cases, where you can see who is working on what to solve which challenges and how it is linked with the overall objective of the business. As long as you steer the overall objectives and create a common language, you don't have to modernize your systems. You just modernize how they talk, how they interact with each other. You don't have to rip and replace everything. You might have a system, a modern system, where you wrap everything together and you build on top of those. So you don't have to put the asset that has been working for the last 30 years to away, since if it's not communicating, not giving the results that you want, the process parameters that you are looking for, you might be able to modernize certain parts of it. But at the end of the day, it's a common infrastructure, and every node, every data source is actually part of that ecosystem. The data is actually your fuel to, like a refinery from the oil. Everyone is talking about for the 21st century, data is the new oil. What does that mean? Basically, we extract oil, we find oil where it lives, we extract it, we transfer it, we refine it through the refinery process, and you distribute it. It's the same thing with the data. You basically need to find where are the data sources, where the oil lives. You need to be able to extract it through common APIs or data acquisition systems. You need to have a pipeline to transfer between those systems to the refinery, where you are operating on the raw events, the data, and turning that into transformation, and you distribute it through the operators, engineers, managers, dashboards. For the investors, doesn't matter. You have the refinery process. You need to be able to put in place the from data acquisition to transfer to refinery process. So what does that mean for the results? Basically, once you have implemented those kind of initiatives, the digital transformation initiatives, you need to be able to see from even the conversation changes during the meetings rather than, okay, this is what happened in the last shift, this is what happened last year, these are the trends, to what is happening and what is next. The tone of the meetings actually change rather than proactive problem solving, trying to understand what were the root causes and create a team dedicated to solve those challenges, to get real-time insights, already solve those challenges in real time, make the optimum decisions, learn from the mistakes, and optimize the process accordingly. You are creating shorter and shorter implementation cycles with this kind of approach rather than trying to solve the problem in a long cycle where you need to be able to collect, analyze different data sources, try to understand if it's happening again and again. Companies do not die from one large mistake. They can survive. Most of the companies can survive from a large mistake. The problem is they die by thousand paper cuts. Making those different, not optimum decisions, not solving the objectives for the business, they actually have depreciating returns on the decisions that they make. In order to solve those, you need to be able to understand what are the biggest losses for the company right now, how can we actually improve those, and you can have a basic prioritization methodology. We also use the same methodology. Basically, you need to have a business objective to solve those challenges. Those are usually derived by three major drivers for the company. One of them is costs. If you don't have that much energy consumption, of if you are not paying that much to energy, if it's the cost structure of your business is not driving you to optimize the utilities cost, do not focus on those. If it's a labor issue, focus on those. You need to be able to understand the cost structure of the business. This is the first part. And you can categorize those in different formats. It could be IFRS, or it could be a simple calculation like raw material, labor cost, maintenance cost, R&D cost, logistics cost, etc. Once you understand the cost profile of the business, the second part is basically the KPIs of the business. What the company is trying to achieve. Are they trying to be positioned as the best performance for delivery, or in terms of quality, or their objective is to have flexibility on which resource they can allocate? They might have a press operator, they might have an injection molding operator. They maybe they are looking for a transferable knowledge between those operators, so they don't have to train and find new talent. Those might be objectives for the business as well. So you need to be able to understand the KPIs of the business. The third part is basically competitiveness. How you are positioned against competition. How are your peers or competitors acting in the market? How are you lagging in those? Are they more mature in certain areas? Those will be the business objectives drivers for identifying the problem, one of the pillars for solving the challenge. The second part is how quickly can we solve that problem. If you are trying to minimize the labor cost, you might need to have certain requirements like aligning with layoff requirements for the for the internal parts. You might need to be able to communicate with HR. You might have a group that is controlling all of the labor relations. There might be certain regulations. You need to be able to understand how much effort will it take to solve that problem. The third part is basically understanding if you have the right data that is available for you to solve that challenge. Basically, if you don't know how many employee you have right now at the factory, and you are trying to optimize the overall labor cost, you cannot solve that challenge. You need to be able to have a system in place to realistically monitor in real time how many people are working in which areas. That might be even an Excel solution, even though if you have a digital representation of the physical world, you can solve that challenge. It could be stored in files, it could be stored in systems, it doesn't matter. As long as you have the data, you can actually solve that challenge. Those three criteria, when you put in an axis, how it's important for the business, how much time will it take to solve that challenge, and do we have enough data to solve that challenge. Basically, once you put all of those three, you will be able to identify the quick wins for the business. You will have a short time to value and understand, okay, this might be solved in really short term. This second part is happens when you have a midterm effect, like 2 quarters, 3 quarters into business starting those initiatives. That starts with an immediate result, a quick win in the short term, where the immediate you can see, okay, I can solve that challenge in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks. Then you will have a midterm effect, like 2 quarters, 3 quarters in. If you attack the right problem, the right constraint of the business, you might even see 10 to 20% increases in certain areas of the related problems or KPIs. You can actually benchmark across different sites, understand the lifts in EBITDA. You usually see double-digit transformation if you are solving the right challenge for the business. There is always a limiting factor, the constraint of the business. Once you solve that, you will see a tremendous jump in solving those initiatives for iterative approach. The long-term approach is actually continuously transforming the business. You become so agile that the transformation actually becomes the fuel of the organization. You can solve the challenges without requiring anyone. They are already prioritized. You don't need external consultation or process experts to solve those challenges. The team actually builds the muscle that you need for solving those problems in a common infrastructure where they understand how they correspond in the value chain of the organization. Once you have those available, then it becomes a non in such a in a such power that you cannot even imagine from the position where you are. Once you have that, it becomes a complete weapon for you. You will be competing on those powers. Then it will start for different challenges for the organization. So another constraint will emerge. How are we going to retain that talent in the company? How are we going to make the new investments or expanding to another site makes it so much feasible where we can deploy it in a few months rather than a few years. Those will be solving new challenges where you did not get the expertise that you already built in. So long term is more continuous transformation. Organization learn from its own data. It becomes the fuel of that transformation, and not from external help like consultants or process experts. So what is next? What is the next step for the evolution? Basically, you are aiming to create the clarity for the business to understand this is what we are trying to achieve as a three word, maybe three sentences for the overall strategy of the company. And you are trying to create a single source of truth for the organization where everyone is aligned on the same objectives of the business, not conflicting, aligned ones, and you are simulating where would be the best allocation of the capital resources to solve the challenges in such a way we will have the biggest impact with minimum implementation requirement with the already available data. Then it will start to show you the other constraints of the business, because digital transformation will show you it's not about the systems that you have, it's maybe the calibration problems, how to make uptime. You see the root causes of the problem for the asset. You will say, okay, my machine is not working as I planned. Then you will be implementing maintenance initiatives to keep up with the availability, how to optimize that availability for that equipment. Then it will become a different trade-off where you need to be able to repair versus buy. Unless you have the data that is supporting those, let's say you would like to modernize one of the presses, the one that is been 30 years old and do not share that process parameters. What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve uptime? What if the equipment has 95% availability? And with the changeovers, it has all of the functionalities that you need. It's working really great. The new equipment may not have that compatibility, the quality of the production, you don't know. Should we upgrade it? Should we modernize it? Should we keep maintaining? So the challenge is understanding what are the alternatives to solve that challenge, if it's a challenge. If it's identified as a challenge and you are trying to solve it, then what would it yield at the end of the day to solve that problem? If we have like an availability problem for the rollers, if you quantify how much time you lose if you have one roller versus two rollers, and how much it's time spent for changing between one roller production, if you can calculate the labor cost, if you can calculate the energy consumption during that, or any other related costs that incur during those changeovers, and put it in the board to say we are losing 5% of the capacity due to these changeovers. If we go into double roll, we will reduce the overall availability loss from 5% to 2.5%. We are spending this much on energy, utilities, labor cost, and these are the indirect costs that's affected with these problems that we have, with the constraint that we have. If we go into a double roller, it will take 2 months time to implement it. We will lose this much capacity, but at the end of the day, it will have a positive return on investment in 14 months, maybe 12 months, maybe even under 12 months. As long as the data supports, as long as the implementation is in parallel with what you desire, then you will be able to communicate. And it becomes, rather than a politics to convince people to say, I said so, or having those communications, what happened, what's going to happen, I have this expertise. You will be just speaking with the same language, with its data transformed into an information. And once you have that alignment, that clarity, you will be able to make decisions without requiring the process expert. You will be able to make it mathematically feasible to say, this is the math behind it. As long as you can create the math behind it, no one will question it. As a strategic architect, your role evolves from decision maker to a strategic conductor. Basically, you are, rather than making bets on your expertise and aligning different parts of the company, you are basically steering the company through the live data streams instead of static reports. So you are creating the translation, the language, the common language foundation for the overall business. Because when there is no clarity, everyone talks. So clarity first, then autonomy next. Your your responsibility for the strategic architect as a strategic architect to make the company available for the new year, for the upcoming challenges. You need to be able to create a resilient infrastructure, resilient company. In order to have a resilient company, you need to be able to solve the challenges more quicker than your competition. In order to do that, again, it comes back to leverages. You have capital, you have collaboration, you have automation, or you have standardized operating procedures, content that you can share throughout the organization. You cannot multiply yourself. Everyone has 24 hours. The decisions, the bets that we make makes the difference for those. If you have more opportunities, if you have more clarity, then it will automatically unravel the problem for you. Once you unravel the problem, what are the root causes, how can we solve it, what are the business impacts, you will create a common language for all of different parts of the organization. Then it will turn into, rather than static reports, having a real conversation on what is the data behind it, how is supporting it. Alternatively, you will have the best investments, best allocation of the resources with the clarity first, then autonomy. Thank you.